Greetings, brethren, in the Seventh-day Adventist Church, and welcome to our presentation, where we will address the very important subject of the judgment of the living, and ask questions such as, what is it? When does it take place? And who is involved? This has arisen in part due to a lot of discussion and misunderstanding about the subject that we see on Facebook and YouTube and throughout the internet. So today we want to look at some of the answers from the Bible and the Spirit of Prophecy. But first we need to address some of the common Seventh-day Adventist misconceptions about the judgment for the living. The first comes from a recent very popular video by Pastor David Gates called Even at the Doors, and he claims that the judgment of the living began on September 23, 2015 and will end in the spring of 2019. Other Seventh-day Adventists think that we are presently in the time of the judgment of the living. Others believe that the judgment of the living is the character work that we need to be involved with each day. And others believe that the shaking or the purification of the Seventh-day Adventist Church will be caused by the National Sunday Law. Well, as it turns out, none of these are entirely correct. Some of them are blatantly false. So, what is the judgment of the living? We want to address that here plainly. So, what are some of the relevant facts about the judgment of the living? We're going to summarize with 9 points. First, it is the present truth that the flock needs now. You can read this reference, Early Writings, page 63. The message that began in 1844, the judgment of the dead, is very important, but what we need now, the present truth, is the soon coming judgment for the living. It turns out that it separates the wheat from the tares in the Seventh-day Adventist Church. It first begins at the house of God, the Seventh-day Adventist Church, 1 Peter 4:17. Many Seventh-day Adventists, such as Pastor Gates, are realizing and warning people that this is about to begin, but they don't have any understanding of what actually constitutes or what's going to take place. It turns out that the judgment of the living begins with the slaughter of Ezekiel 9. So we cannot understand the judgment of the living until we look at Ezekiel chapter 9. It's carried out by angels from God and not committed in the hands of any mortal human being. Look at this reference, Testimonies to Ministers, page 47. Some more facts about the judgment for the living. It is an additional message to the judgment of the dead, which began in 1844. It takes place during the half hour of silence found in Revelation chapter 8, verse 1. Now, this is a topic of another study, but the judgment of the living is this verse. This is not talking about the second coming. The judgment of the living presents a purified church comprised of 144,000 who will go out and give the loud cry message of Revelation 18 and gather in a great multitude from all nations, kindreds, tongues, and people in Revelation 7, verse 9. And finally, it will be the greatest event in the history of God's church on earth. So if this is so significant, let us look at some of the particulars, the details. This reference in Great Controversy, page 426, tells us that of 4 events that describe the same thing. We'll read, the coming of Christ as our high priest to the most holy place for the cleansing in the sanctuary, brought to view in Daniel 8, verse 14. The coming of the Son of Man to the Ancient of Days as presented in Daniel 7, verse 13. And the coming of the Lord to his temple, foretold by Malachi, are descriptions of the same event. And this is also represented by the coming of the bridegroom to the marriage, described by Christ in the parable of the 10 virgins of Matthew 25. So what is this great event? Well, let's summarize these 4 descriptions of the same event on this chart. So the events are the cleansing of the sanctuary, brought to view in Daniel 8:14, The coming of the Son of Man to the Ancient of Days as presented in Daniel 7:13. The coming of the Lord to his temple as foretold by Malachi. And the coming of the bridegroom to the marriage described by Christ in the parable of the 10 virgins in Matthew 25. All of these are descriptions of the same event, and none of this is the second coming in the clouds of glory. It's an unexpected coming. Let's first read examples of each case here in Malachi chapter 3 verses 1 to 3. This is what Ellen White was referring to. It reads, "Behold, I will send my messenger, and he shall prepare the way before me. And the Lord, whom ye seek, shall suddenly come to his temple, even the message of the covenant, whom ye delight in. Behold, he shall come, saith the Lord of hosts. But who may abide in the day of his coming? And who shall stand when he appeareth? For he is like a refiner's fire, and like fuller's soap. And he shall sit as a refiner and purifier of silver. And he shall purify the sons of Levi, and purge them as gold and silver, that they may offer unto the Lord an offering in righteousness." Seventh-day Adventists often think of this as the second coming, but it is in no way the second coming. This takes place prior to the second advent. The second coming is well known and anticipated, but this coming is unexpected because the Lord will come suddenly to his temple. People aren't looking for it. And what's going to happen here? He's going to purify the sons of Levi. This does not take place at the second advent. So clearly this coming here is the coming of Christ to purify and cleanse his church. So what's Ezekiel 9 all about? Well, look at this question. Is the slaughter of Ezekiel 9 to take place in the world or in the church? Is it the 7 last plagues, or is it the purification of the church? Good question. Well, let's analyze. Let's read the scriptures and then analyze them. Ezekiel chapter 9, verses 1, 9, and 4. He cried also in my ears with a loud voice, saying, Cause them that have charge over the city to draw near, even every man with his destroying weapon in his hand. And the Lord said unto him, Go through the midst of the city, through the midst of Jerusalem, and set a mark upon the foreheads of the men that sigh and cry for all the abominations that be done in the midst thereof. Then said he unto me, The iniquity of the house of Israel and Judah is exceeding great, and the land is full of blood, and the city full of perverseness. For they say, The Lord forsaketh the earth, and the Lord seeth not. So, in response, the angels have charge of the city, Jerusalem, not of the world, and not of Babylon. Even an altogether uninformed Christian knows that the terms Jerusalem, Judah, and Israel mean the church, never even as much as imply the world. They have always meant the church and will always mean the church, for that is what they are. Continuing on, the slaughter of Ezekiel 9 is positively not the same as the 7 last plagues, Revelation 16, because the plagues fall on Babylon, but the slaughter on Judah and Jerusalem. Moreover, the angels of Ezekiel 9 slay everyone who does not have the mark, but the plagues do not slay anyone. By wresting Moses' writings, the Jews tried to refute Christ's teachings, and it is certain that if the Laodiceans continue to wrest Sister White's writings in trying to refute the message for today, then their end shall be even more mournful than was the Jews. Concerning what she says about Ezekiel 9, read Testimonies, Volume 3, page 267, Volume 5, page 211, also The Great Controversy, page 656 and 657. Ezekiel 9 pictures the judgment of the living in the house of God, 1 Peter 4:17, the sealing of the saints and the destruction of the wicked in the church. This is found in a publication called The Timely Greetings, Volume 1, Number 3, page 12. You can find in the link in the description box below to acquire a copy of this tract and read it all for yourself. We encourage you to please do so. So, wise or foolish? Virgins, the choice is yours. Do you want the extra oil, We need to know what the extra oil is in order to become a wise virgin. So let's look more at this. The parable of the 10 virgins. In this parable, it is seen that the church is likened to 10 virgins, 5 of whom do not avail themselves of extra oil, special truth for this time. That is, these 5 do not give heed to the truth of the judgment of the living, the separation or the purification of the church. When the cry is made, "Behold, the bridegroom cometh, go ye out to meet him," all 10 virgins see that the light of their lamps is going out. They see that the message of the judgment of the dead is passing. Quickly then, the 5 wise virgins refill their lamps with the extra oil which they have stored in their vessels, and go on to meet the bridegroom. But the 5 foolish virgins, who thought there was no need for extra oil, no need for an extra message, the message of the judgment of living, find themselves in gross darkness. Yes, they find themselves without the light which the message of the judgment of living unfolds. Upon discovering their foolish neglect, they rush to obtain the oil, light on the subject, but in the meantime the door has been shut. Probationary time for the virgins, the church, has closed. When they call for admission, they are politely told by the Lord himself, "I know you not." This parable of the 10 virgins, Ellen White described in the Christ Object Lessons, is directly applicable to the experience of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. So continuing on, it said, "The sign of the coming kingdom, which this parable brings forth, is obviously the special message, the extra oil, which announces the judgment of the living, the message which awakens the open-hearted truth-seekers, and which dooms its opposers, the hypocrites and lukewarm in the church, those who are satisfied and think themselves rich and increased with goods, in need of nothing, in need of no timely truth, those who never awake to the fact that they are absolutely destitute. Mind you, these are not my words. Read what the Lord says to Laodicea. Rich and increased of goods, but poor, miserable, blind, and naked. Revelation chapter 3, verse 18. So this is found in the publication Time and Greetings, Volume 2, number 44, page 39. Once again, if you visit the link in the description box below, you can acquire a copy, a PDF version of this publication, and read it for yourself in its entirety. So the judgment of living also involves this harvest which separates the wheat from the tares. We read, "Since the separation of the tares from among the wheat, the harvest, is one and the same work with the judgment of the living, then the only difference between the judgment of the dead and the judgment of the living is that the former, the names of the wicked are removed from the books above, whereas in the latter the wicked are bodily swept away from among the living members of the church." Not only the prophecies and parables here considered, but also the type, the atonement, Leviticus 23, including early writings, page 118, and testimonies to ministers, page 234, teach the same truth. This is what the cleansing of the sanctuary, Daniel 8:14, is. This is what the antitypical atonement is. Great Controversy, page 399 to 402, 420 to 422, and 428 to page 430. This is what the judgment of the living is. This is what the purification of the church is. Testimonies, volume 5, page 80. This is what brings the end of the world, and this is what restores eternity to Christianity. Timely Greetings, volume 2, number 45, page 10. Once again, you can acquire a PDF download of this track and the link in the description box below. So what brings the end of the world? Well, summarizing what we just read, the following: the cleansing of the sanctuary, Daniel 8:14. The antitypical atonement, Great Controversy, pages 339 to 402, 420 to 422, and 428 to 430. It's known as the judgment of the living, brings the end of the world, and the purification of the church, Testimonies, volume 5, page 80. This is what brings the end of the world. God bringing judgment to purify the Seventh-day Adventist church, the cleansing the sanctuary in separating wheat from the tares. So when does the separation begin? It begins at the beginning of the loud cry. So here's the question. I'm unable to reconcile the teaching that Ezekiel 9 removes the unconverted, the 5 foolish virgins, from the church at the beginning of the loud cry, with the parable of the 10 virgins, which preserves the wise and the foolish together until the Lord's coming. So this Seventh-day Adventist thinks that the separation of wise and foolish occurs at the second advent. Answer. The parable of the 10 virgins cannot preserve the virgins until the Lord's coming, but rather up to some time before the final close of probation. For note more carefully what the Scripture saith. And they that were ready went in with him to the marriage, and the door was shut. Matthew 25, verse 10. Continuing on. The words to the marriage denote that the call was made and the door was shut before the marriage took place. And as Christ is married or crowned at the close of human probation, see Great Controversy, page 426 and 427, and before the 7 last plagues are poured out, it proves that the call, behold, the bridegroom cometh, is not the coming of Christ in the clouds when he receives his people unto himself, John 14, verse 3, but rather his coming to the sanctuary for the judgment of the living. As the 5 wise virgins are the 144,000, Revelation 14, verse 4, we see that the cry for them to awake is the same as Isaiah 52, verse 1, which makes the time of the cry the same as the sealing time of the 144,000, 3 Testimony, page 266, and their meeting the bridegroom the same as Ezekiel 9. Then, after the close of probation, and after the pouring out of the plagues, he will come and take his own, not to witness the marriage, but to eat the marriage supper after the ceremony is performed. This comes from Volume 1, Symbolic Code number 10, page 9. Once again, you can find a link to this publication in the description box below. So, brethren, let's get the extra oil today. The message and the description of the soon coming judgment for the living, the purification of God's church through Ezekiel 9, the separation of the wheat and tares. And here's the oil. Here's the tracts, the publications, timely greetings. Volume 1 and Volume 2. These are copies that are found in the James White Library, Andrews University. Now we've digitally scanned these so you can download and read them for yourselves. Or contact us and request print copies. We'll be happy to send them to you. So for more information to acquire detailed study outlines on this subject of the judgment of the living, or to request literature that expounds the judgment of the living in greater detail, or to arrange for a personal study on the judgment of the living, please feel free to contact us anytime or visit our website. Our email, hosea21@gmail.com, telephone 860-798-3672, and our website, shepherds-rod-speaks.org. Or subscribe to our YouTube channel by clicking the link below. The title of our channel is President True Studies. We thank you for your time. May God richly bless your search for truth as for hidden treasure. Godspeed.